Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for your patience. We're just dealing with obviously the logistics behind being a hybrid event between having people in person and having people online. So thank you very much, everyone, for bearing with us there. We're obviously starting a few minutes after. My name's Marcus Vaughan. I'm the co-founder of Illumina, and joined with me today is Julian Keel, who, if you're online, you probably can't see, but here's here, I promise, in person. We've got a great session today, obviously live from Denver. We're very excited to be here as we build out our US operations, which is very exciting times for us at Illumina. But today's session in particular, we're going to be talking to building a culture of resilience with gamification. Gamification is very close to our heart, and as we go through this presentation, you'll probably see why. A lot of it comes from the lessons that we've learned over the last few years, in particular, having gone through COVID with a lot of our clients, and a lot of the lessons that have come from what we thought was going to work in resilience to what actually works when it comes to resilience. So really exciting session today, guys. This is a roundtable, so I have put everyone on mute to start with. I'll go through the presentation, but we'll open it up at the end for really an open discussion, get people's thoughts. Our organization in Illumina, we're very collaborative by nature. We innovate through understanding the challenges of resilience managers, and that's really how we operate. So the more we can get a better understanding of how everyone's tracking with that and building, I guess, culture in resilience across your organizations, the more that we can help along that journey. Without further ado, we might get stuck into the presentation if that's okay. So culture, we'll start with culture. Wow, there's probably about 1,000,001 human capital consultants that have tried to define what organizational culture looks like, and there are literally as many definitions about that. To summarize and paraphrase and boil it down, I mean, I think we could probably all agree it's really around the behaviors that actually exist within an organization and how things actually get done, as opposed to what is written on paper. I mean, as Peter Drucker famously put, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think if you look into obviously what he's talking about there is what an organization may wish to achieve might not actually achieve if it's not aligned with the culture within its organization. I'll take that one step further, and I'll say the same thing from a resilience program perspective. I think very much the intention that we see a lot of resilience practitioners enter with an organization to build up a really solid foundation of resilience within an organization can quite often just be totally derailed by a culture that might exist there. And that's from leadership down. And so today's session, we're going to talk through some of those, I guess, those common pitfalls we see with resilience practitioners and trying to build up a culture of resilience in an organization. We're going to look at some of the key ingredients that we look for in terms of building up resilience programs within organizations. And importantly, we're going to start looking into some of the neuroscience that we've, I guess, worked with as we've built out our approach using things like microsimulations and most importantly, gamification. So bear with me, guys. It's a bit of a loop. There's a bit of an arc going on. We will round out with gamification, but we've kind of almost got to take a step back and look at the problem before we get stuck into the solution. So I think to start that off, when I talk about common pitfalls, I think there is one thing that stands out with every organization, regardless of whether you're using technology or whatever it is. I think one of the greatest challenges we have as a profession is what is known as optimism bias. Now, optimism bias, I'll ask you two questions to highlight what is optimism bias. So two questions. First question is, do you believe an organization in the US, somewhere in the US today, will be hit by a ransomware attack? So I'd say that this probability is pretty high. Yeah, we've got hands up around the room here. There we go. Mary Kay, you've got hands up as well. So I think we all agree ransomware, I mean, you'd have to have your head in the sand if you didn't think ransomware is a real probable threat these days. So the second question is, do you believe your organization is going to get hit by a ransomware attack today? So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? If I think about it from an Illumina perspective, I'd say, no, I don't think the probability is very high. Yourselves?
I'd like to think that, but it boils down to not necessarily if, it's when. I think we're all susceptible to it, and as the threats are growing, whether it be social engineering or technical type threats, each organization is vulnerable, and maybe the mitigation strategies aren't in place.
Spot on, spot on. I don't think you can summarize it any better than that. But when it comes to today, if I think about my organization today, I'm sitting here, I'm certainly not in like a coil spring ready to go on a ransomware response. I'll be brutally honest. I'm sitting here going, I'm going to do an ACP chapter meeting, and then I'm probably going to go have lunch, and I'm going to do a heap of client meetings this afternoon. I'm going to round out my day. Unfortunately, due to time zones, probably somewhere around 1 a.m. and I'll move on to the next thing. And the belief, and this is optimism bias at work, right? So Talish, you're right, and I'd advise everyone, if you do have some spare time, you don't have to become a neuroscientist at all, but taking some basic time to look through the basics of things like optimism bias. And Talish Wright's a great researcher out of Oxford in the UK, does a lot of work in this space. Optimism bias is not knowing, having the belief that yes, bad things will happen, that expecting things to work out better than what they probably actually will. And the example of, yes, ransomware attacks happen. Of course they happen. Yes, I understand that ransomware attacks happen. They just don't happen to me. It's the same thing of getting to this office today. It's like, hey, we all hop in a car. We realize car crashes happen. Do I think I'm going to have a car crash this morning getting to work? No, I don't. And that's optimism bias. And 80% of people are dispositioned cognitively to optimism bias. And that's a good thing. Without it, typically, you can actually be prone to depression. So it's a recognizable cognitive bias. It's something we all live with. It means there's hope. We all have hope and expecting things to turn out better than what they might actually be. Now, why is that relevant? Well, in resilience, we're obviously preparing people for game day, the worst day, right? When things are really stretched and at their worst. And one of our greatest challenges is a lot of people are thinking that that just isn't going to happen. Now, in the resilience profession, I think we all stand there and go, to your point, it's a matter of time, right? Like park probability is literally on a long enough time scale, it's going to happen. Like it's as simple as that. We're obviously dealing with a lot of people who aren't in the resilience industry. We're dealing with HR practitioners. We're dealing with customer service practitioners. We're dealing with CFOs. These are people who aren't thinking about these things happening today. And so they are living with optimism bias. And so as a resilience profession, I think it's really important to understand that, number one, innately, we're up against it. And so we have to find strategies to find our way around that. Now, one thing that the resilience industry has done for many years, and I think it's a brilliant strategy, is give people a lived experience. So all of a sudden you go from, well, this could happen to, ooh, this is what it feels like when it does happen. And we obviously do that through things like major operational exercises, tabletop simulations. I wouldn't say e-learning so much, but by giving people a lived experience, they're able to go through and essentially go, okay, this is actually what it feels like. And it does start breaking down some of that optimism bias because you've had a lived experience. We all now know, like if you'd ask me, what's the probability or what's it feel like when you have a global pandemic? If you asked me that in 2019, I'd say, well, probability is low, right? Like we've got this under control. We're a highly connected society. We're way advanced in terms of our research and biology. Really, like if a global pandemic, and I remember at the beginning of COVID, even thinking, I remember people saying, hey, this is going to go beyond September. And you're going, really? Like, there's no way this is going to go longer than September. And here we are, 2 and a bit years later, 2.25 years later, we're still dealing with it, like it hasn't finished yet. And that's through having a lived experience now. So the next pandemic that comes along, yeah, it's very real. And will it go for years? Yeah, I have appreciation that it will go for years. Do we need to think about how my organization needs to respond to that? Yeah, we do need to think about that. I've learned that. That's a lived experience. Of course, the big issue that we have is the second challenge we come to as resilience practitioners is you want to give people that level of impact that gives them that lived experience. Obviously, we have this balance between how much resource can our organization throw into this versus what's the impact. And at the top of that scale, operational exercises, yeah, great impact, fantastic. Hugely expensive in terms of time and money. You go further down that scale, we've got tabletop exercises, absolutely fantastic. Always advocate, they're great. They are that sweet spot between getting a few hours in an executive's diary or a senior management's diary. Of course, it takes still a lot of time internally to organize consultants, so on and so forth. Then you go right down to e-learning. I'll put my hand up, and sorry for any e-learning practitioners in the room. I'm not a massive fan of e-learning because I don't think it does actually provide the impact and that experiential learning that I think is so important to actually change behavior. But there it is. Hey, it's one of those options on the scale. Of course, when you are able to invest those resources, what we find, because we do have those resource constraints, we're dealing with how far can you scale that. And the brutal reality is, if you're looking at an organization, and we've seen this, before at Illumina, we're, crisis management, business continuity consultancy, and our daily bread was literally running simulations. And you would find your exec team, great, gets the privilege of doing it. That's you can get into their diary, and they'll typically kick and scream until that happens. Senior management, yes, hit and miss depending on resources. After that, it's almost everyone for themselves, to be perfectly honest. And that's no fault of our own. That really just comes down to we only have so much time and resource to invest into a resilience program, and getting that budget's not easy, right? Like, it's up against everything else. And that budget at the moment probably even looks better than what that budget's going to look like in the next 2 years, as all the economists around the world talk about a contraction. And CFOs really start underlining, what's my ROI here on this? And if they haven't had a lived experience, they might be concerned about pandemics now, but if they haven't been through a ransomware attack, then what does that look like? So question mark. And so it brings into thoughts, how do we actually look at opportunities to scale, I guess, a level of impact, which is, we'll get onto that a little bit more in terms of where gamification comes into it. In terms of engagement, I think it's really important to understand that every time you start with an organization, it's really important to understand where are you at the moment in terms of engagement around the room. And that will look different at different levels because of what they've been exposed to. At that senior management level, if we've done some really killer tabletop exercises or operational exercises, you might find some of those execs are not disengaged, not always evangelists, but they might be somewhere in the middle, that passively involved. Yes, I know I have to do this. Yes, we will do it. Yes, I can give you that. Well, actually, the 3-hour tabletop's almost, I think that's almost extinct. It's probably more like 90 minutes these days at best. But you'll see different levels. Now, if you've put people through e-learning and that's all they've had, there's work to be done. I mean, e-learning doesn't drive a great level of engagement. I've done e-learning. I'm sure everyone in this room and online have done e-learning before, and we've gone click, 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 and then asked Shannon for what the answers are, and then gone through the answers and compliant. Boom. I think e-learning is one of those things that it helps us get compliant. I don't think it helps build resilience, and I don't think it helps get that level of engagement we're really looking for. And we look at engagement as in not just doing the activity, but what's your level of enthusiasm in doing that activity. So it's a really important distinction there. Now, what are some of those ingredients to success in terms of what we look for? The first thing is when we go into an organization, we start talking to them around an Illumina's approach to this, what we call a microsimulation program. And that's where we bring gamification in. And one of the first things that we do is ask, okay, well, what's your program, resilience program's objectives, and how is that aligned to the organization's strategic objectives? What does that engagement look like? What have they been exposed to before? Is it currently tabletops? Is it, are they exposed to e-learning, and where are they on that spectrum? And then also, what's that cadence? Like, what's the level of engagement we have with these personas across the organization? Is it a once a year thing? Is it a twice a year thing? Is it a tabletop and then a BIA refresher meeting? What does that look like? Because it is really hard to build culture and change behavior when there's just so few touch points.
Yes, I was going to add an example. If you go back a slide there, just as recently as yesterday, I'm not sure how well people can hear me. If they can't, we might relay on. But just as recently as yesterday, I was talking with an organisation. They had their program over the balance of the year had 35 different objectives of that, of which 17 of those mapped directly back into different micro simulations. And we've not tried to bite off all 17, but we have picked a structured 6 to roll out over the coming probably 3 months or thereabouts, which I think really try to hit the key things they want to first, and then we'll start to think about the back half of the year thereafter. But it's been a really interesting and collaborative exercise, thinking about that program, and also, I suppose, the cadence of the micro simulation activities off the back of that, which will probably roll fortnightly for their business, progressively starting out very simple, and then progressively becoming more challenging for their team.
Yeah, spot on, absolutely. And I think that's one thing that when we get in and we have that conversation, And one of those key questions is, number one is your resilience program. What are the objectives? Is it aligned to the strategic objectives? And also from a values perspective, if the organisation has values that they want to drive outcomes for their customers, for their colleagues, how is that driving through the organisation? And then you overlay that with how far is your resilience program actually stretching? Because if it's only hitting that top tier, well, that's great that the leadership team knows what the objectives are, but what about the guy, on the shop floor who's selling mobile phones at a retail store? Does he understand what the objectives are of the organisation from a customer perspective? So really understanding what are the objectives, and then going back into making sure that the resilience program is also, ask yourself the question, what's in it for me from a stakeholder perspective, right? So I'm a CFO, I'm getting involved in this, whether it be a microsimulation or a tabletop, what's in it for me? How is this helping my objectives? What's the balanced scorecard that he's being reviewed around against? What are his objectives? And the same thing from HR, the same thing for customer. Are they concerned about churn and NPS? So really understanding those objectives and making sure they're aligned to the activities that we're rolling out become a really important thing, especially as we start talking about building out scale, which we'll talk to in a few minutes. I'm going to talk a little bit, we're going to start merging into, again, a little bit of the neuroscience between, gamification and also the approaches that we've often taken over the years in carrot versus stick. Now, I'll use this example. It's a great research article that I read, which really highlights just the importance of reconsidering how we're hitting people over the head with a stick from a regulatory perspective. Hey, 60 to 70% of our clients are financial services, so regulation's a great backbone for that, right? Helps get things started. But in this particular study, so I'll talk you through this, back in 2008, I think it was, 2008, there's a New York State research team that essentially was looking at hand washing and cleanliness within hospitals. And the compliance rates, don't want to scare anyone, hopefully everyone's not sick at the moment, really low is the brutal reality. They found one hospital in particular where they had their ICU unit, or ICU, sorry, was down at 10% compliance with hand washing. Now, they go in and they have a look at the environment of the situation here, and we've got all the signs up, all the trainings in place. You need to wash your hands. Here's the hand washing capability. Like, it's as you'd expect, right? You've seen the hospitals, everyone's seen that. It's like, it's all there. Yeah, the compliance rate's down at 10%. And so they thought, right, how do we actually change this? At the moment, we're taking very compliance. You must wash your hands as part of the program. This is what's expected. You've got the training, so on and so forth. They flipped that on its head and thought, well, why don't we actually tap into, trying to use this approach as opposed to avoidance, which is, the compliance, you shall or else, taking an approach to tapping into people's mindsets. And by doing that, they went ahead and installed some cameras. And they thought, okay, let's install cameras that will monitor it. Didn't change anything. And then they went the next step further and said, well, why don't we actually install LED screens that give direct feedback about how they're going? And so the cameras were set up to monitor the situation. So as someone come up and wash their hands, that the information went back to an analyst team, essentially sitting there and watching it, and plugged back live results by this LED screen saying, congratulations, well done. You've just washed your hands. Your current shift is at 42% compliance, and you've just helped get it up to 47%. Keep up the good work. Great, pat on the back. Now, what that did was gave them a couple of things. They had immediate results in terms of immediate rewards. It was a little dopamine hit for the participant. They go, great, got a pat on the back. There's a reward. It doesn't have to be monetary. It's a little thumbs up. Well done. It's also given them some progress tracking. So they've gone, okay, right, I've gone from 34% to 36% or 42%, whatever it was for that shift. And it's also put them in with their colleagues and saying, hey, your shift is here. This is how your shift, all your colleagues on that shift are doing. So you can socialize about it. And these are the three key ingredients to essentially trigger the reward function in someone's brain that essentially makes them go on repeat to go and do that activity again. By that small change, they essentially got a compliance rate from 10% compliance to 90% compliance to that ICU area, which is obviously a stark contrast. And then what they found, even after they took the monitoring equipment away, they went back months later. I think it dropped somewhere down to the high 80s, but it remained. Essentially, the loop had been installed in people's brains, and they were feeling good. And that actually got them to a point of of essentially washing their hands, which is very good because listen, there's any chance I don't live with too much of this advice. I probably will like end up in one day. And so it's nice to think that people are actually washing their hands. And so it's taking that, I guess the question mark with that is, how are we treating our resilience programs? Are we tapping into the reward function of people's brains, or are we telling them we have to do this from a top-down only approach? And just to put some food for thought in people's minds around making sure that there is a reward function there, that people are getting that pat on the back, and how that is happening in a social and progress tracking way as well, as we should find more results come through. Gamification, this is where gamification kicks in. And as I mentioned before, we do a lot of this. We're very passionate about it. We run microsimulations, which essentially gamify resilience activities. They are, short, sharp tabletops boiled down to 15 minutes online, give people a thumbs up at the end, and they can see their progress. But just to explain some of the method of madness and some of the results we're seeing in gamification, which kind of put us on this path. Great example, this is actually out of Australia, which is where my flying accent comes from. So back in 2012, Metro Trains, which is essentially the transport agency of trains in Melbourne. So Melbourne's a city of 4.5 million, so it's a decent city, but their jurisdiction finishes at the city limits. Like, they don't even look after regional trains. It's literally just the city. Back in 2012, they started a public service announcement called Dumb Ways to Die. And what they developed, really, and you can see it, right? It's really cutesy characters, essentially developed like this really cool little jingle, and they created a little app, so it's a little game. Essentially, you're trying to make sure you make decisions on the app around trying to keep these characters alive. And when they die, as you can see on the screen, they die. Cutesy, pretty gross, but it's done in a very cutesy fashion, so it's not too grotesque. This went viral, so this was amazing. They had, keep in mind, Melbourne's 4.5 million people, right? So that's where this was intended for. They had.
Excuse me, Marcus, can you hear me?
Yes.
Marcus, it's really hard for us online to hear you. It's sounding distant. It's sounding muffled. If you could maybe.
Hello. Is that better?
Closer into the mic. Yeah, thank you.
Got it. Okay. Did we catch any of that last part, or do I need to do a quick recap?
I would love a recap of the last part. I didn't get it. Thanks.
All right, I'll just repeat on Dumb Ways to Die. So this is a public service announcement that started in Melbourne. It was done by Metro Trains. So essentially, they're the agency that looks after trains in the city limits of Melbourne. So back in 2012, they created a public service announcement called Dumb Ways to Die. That consisted of a YouTube jingle, and also consisted of a little app that you would play, just like the native app on your iPhone that you could play. And the whole point is essentially to teach people about being more safe around trains and train platforms. So it's really health and safety focused. And the point of the game was essentially to try and keep these characters alive, and if you fail, they obviously die in a pretty grotesque fashion, as you can see on the screen as examples, but it's done in a really cutesy way, so it's pretty easy to play, very, very easy to get on with. Now, Melbourne's a city of 4.5 million people, and this whole thing went viral. So they had over 334 million views of their YouTube jingle. It was something like, they still are getting millions a month. It was about 3 million a month. They had 340 million downloads of the app, of the game, which is, I think it was around a million a week there for a while. The game's been played over 6.5 billion times. And one of the key points out of this is within the game, if essentially you could make a pledge that you would be more safe around trains, right? It's like they ask you, will you pledge to essentially, do less dumb activities around trains? They had 129 million pledges to be safer around trains. Now, again, I'll compare that back. Melbourne's a city of 4.5 million. So what Metro Trains did for train safety around the world is phenomenal. It just went absolutely viral. And they Metro Trains even reported they had a 20% drop in dumb activities, which are essentially incidents and near misses around train platforms. So
don't see it.
Sorry?
You don't see it anymore.
No, that's right.
As a Melbourneian, it's just people are very cautious, but just behave appropriately. Yeah, that's right. So Julian was just saying Julian's from Melbourne, so he's got a first-hand account of that. It's a very safe train environment these days. And this is one of those great examples where technology
technology is technology, right? I mean, but this is actually about people. And it's how can we leverage technology to get that force multiplier effect to change behavior? And if we can change behavior at scale, and we're talking about something that was created for, I don't think they're even expecting 4.5 million Melburnians to download it, and they got, it's been played 6.5 billion times. So how do we use the force multiplier using gamification to essentially get our resilience programs in a state of viral play? Oh, sorry. And this is where cadence of engagement becomes really important as well. We see one of those, I guess, those key challenges we spoke about before, the resources that we have, obviously the touch points that you can get across an organization on resilience is typically limited, quite limited. It might be once a year or twice a year. And I guess what we're trying to drive through with gamification to that point before, and what we're starting to see with microsimulations, which is our version of, is we are starting to see that engagement ramp up. As Julia mentioned before, we've got clients that are rolling out microsimulations on a fortnightly basis. That's pretty big, to be perfectly honest. I see that as probably a sprint as opposed to a marathon, which I think changing behavior and changing culture is actually more of a marathon than it is a sprint. But if we're able to start building up that level of engagement on a more regular basis, what we are seeing from our client base is we're seeing an increase in muscle memory around the response functions. We're seeing better and more effective use of their response tools when game days do come along. We've got clients going through events right now. It's literally every week that clients, when you obviously you build up enough clients, and to that point before, on a long enough timeline, things do happen. You end up with a lot of clients doing a lot of response. But we've seen organizations, we get to track all the data in terms of their activity using micro simulations. And a lot of our clients are seeing uplifts of engagement through that more regular, I guess, approach to it by about 300%, which is a big shift. Now, have we changed culture? Not yet. Are we on a journey of that? Yeah, absolutely. We're on a journey of that. But it is all about starting to change small behaviors here and there, getting that level of, I guess, interaction and engagement into resilience activities, doing it in a way that doesn't just hit people over the head with a stick, that does give them a lived experience, and it does essentially provide them a reward on the other end. So an important part of all of our micro simulation programs is really around, and trust me, guys, it's a crawl, walk, run approach, because when you go through some of these micro simulations, you realize the maturity level of some of these stakeholders with resilience is really low, like really low. And that's okay, like, because it's a journey, right? Like resilience is you're never finished. It's just one of those continuous journeys. But we are starting to see that scale out. And that's why we find, typically you start at the crisis response team. They're quite good because they've had the history of being through tabletops. You go to that next level down and yeah, you're kind of starting from scratch, to be perfectly honest. But we are starting to see that scale out, and we're using obviously technology to really empower our clients and our resilience practitioners to essentially get that scale and get that level of engagement up, driving through things like what are the objectives of the organization, what are the values of the organization, down to literally the shop floor, which is I guess a refreshing find. A couple of key takeaways. I'm going to open this up for discussion because I don't want to be sitting here talking for too long, especially if I'm muffled. So yeah, a couple of key takeaways. Obviously, optimism bias is a real thing. Go and take a look at some of the research. It's fascinating stuff, and I implore everyone to go and do it, because it is like what we are talking about is really trying to change human behavior. Like that's what this is all about. Get them to start thinking ahead and seeing the world a little bit more like how we see it. Obviously, understanding the drivers of engagement and aligning those objectives and values across the program, thinking about the carrot instead of the stick all the time, building in a reward system and understanding what that looks like for various different stakeholders, and thinking about gamification, and I'd say technology in general, as a way to get that scalable force multiplier effect. Like if you have a tech stack that is not helping you get across the organization more efficiently, then think about the tech stack. It's as simple as that. Things are changing pretty quickly. And then if you can, and you should be able to, increase that level of cadence of engagement. If you can create a more efficient way to get across the organization, then you should be able to get more touch points with your internal clients on a more regular basis. And we're certainly finding that by taking that approach. I'm happy, after this to talk through with anyone who wants to learn more about what we're doing from a microsimulation perspective. Our resilience fundamentals is typically the first kind of program that we roll out with clients. It's 6 to get them started in the first 6 months. And as you can see, there's a variety of threats. It's the beauty about these things. They're 15 minutes, so you can get into teams on a regular basis. So our first 6 typically cover off 6 different threats and help validate various different things like roles, validate plans, get people to understand a threat, get people to understand their responsibilities, understand communication protocols, validate data, all the good stuff, right? Like it's all the stuff you need to do as part of your resilience program. We cover that off in the first 6 months. So if anyone's interested, always happy to have a one-on-one discussion around what that looks like, walk you through a microsimulation and give you a first-hand account of that. But I'll say thank you very much. That's a little bit of the view from our world at the moment in terms of what we're doing at the moment. We are, as I mentioned, we're big on gamification. We are seeing the immediate effects of that with our client base. But I'm happy to open it up. This is a roundtable, so I'm happy to open it up to conversation, questions, get any thoughts. Julian, you already know.
We might have a couple in the chat that have
Yes.
already come through. Maybe Mike, maybe questions, but
I think it's more my audio. Sorry, guys. I just saw your audio notes. Apologies. Hopefully that's come out better. Can everyone hear me now? Yeah, Julian, you need to get closer. But anyway, that's okay. Guys, any questions, any thoughts? I'm happy to pass the mic as far as I can pass it.
I have a question, and it's mainly just a foundation to discuss is, what is your definition of resilience?
I think it is a good question. And I think to a certain extent, my definition of resilience is going to be different to your definition of resilience. It's going to be different to your definition of resilience. And it's going to be different to the CEO's definition of resilience. So it almost doesn't matter what my definition of resilience is. To be perfectly honest, I look at it in that it is a continuous approach to essentially improve our ability to sustain and bounce back from events. As I mentioned before, my view on resilience programs, and I say to pretty much every client I walk into a room with, it's like, wherever you are today, we're going to break it and we're going to improve it. And it is through breaking the program, validating the program, that we actually build up that resilience to essentially enhance our ability to respond to particular events. So I look at it as like a continuous journey of learning and improving how we might sustain and respond to particular events. Yeah, and yours? I'm interested in yours as well. And anyone else online who's got you want to drop into chat, or you can unmute yourself.
Right. For me, I view resilience in an organization as one that can adapt to an organization that's in change. We figure we're all constantly changing, and our resilience and our programs that support resilience need to adapt with that, as well as it allows the business to identify and mitigate or accept risks around how it operates, as well as the external and internal influences, and allows the business to pivot if it needs to in challenging times, whether it be pandemic, supply chain, geopolitical, reputational type influences. And to me, it's just operational resilience. It's a blanket that kind of hugs the business to help guide it through these treacherous times.
Yeah, and ever evolving to that point, right?
Right. It's like painting a bridge. As soon as you finish, you go to the other end and you start back over.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Does anyone else online have any notes they want to drop into the chat around their focus or definition of resilience? Anyone want to challenge? The immediate first reward. What type of rewards are received best? Okay, I mean, that's actually a great, sorry, just to repeat the question, if you can't see it online, for the immediate first reward, what type of rewards receive best? I think that, again, we're always working within the bounds of what do we have access to from a rewards perspective. Now, you can look at, I'm probably not the first person to put their hand up and say, put a monetary reward in, because I think that can drive a particular type of behavior. but there are a whole different host of different rewards. I think starting somewhere simple, like actually a basic, well done, keep going, and showing that progress tracking is actually a really good place to start. So it is, I guess, a less tangible reward as opposed to a social validation of the fact that you are making a positive progress on the resilience program. So that's typically where we start because it's free, and it helps start getting people thinking around essentially what they're doing and how that's improving their organization, as opposed to going down the path of something that might be more monetary in nature. But Mary Kay, do you have any thoughts? Or
well, my first thought is when you bring people together in a new experience, it's beverages or food. That at least gets them into the mode where they're distracted from their day-to-day work, at least for that short period of time. And then the other thing I was thinking of was, little goofy things like minions and just little trinkets. And that works when you've got a hybrid team.
yeah.
And it's just a little something, but it's that mental trigger that they constantly see it around their workspace.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense, Mary Kay. I mean, the ability to leave someone with a reminder that brands their moment in time with the resilience program is probably not a bad thing. It's obviously got to be appropriate. You mentioned before a reward system as well. I think that's a really, as in like a point system. I think that's certainly something that could be considered in terms of what comes with that in terms of teams that are excelling at their resilience program. Yeah, that's right. That's right. And I don't even know what that is, Mary Kay. It's very colourful though. Is that a stress ball?
It's a puzzle ball.
Puzzle ball. Gotcha. That could double as a stress ball. Fantastic.
Yep.
Well, there's plenty of stress and resilience, so that makes a lot of sense. That is probably very appropriate. No, I mean, but it's a really good point. I think, hey, if you learn from the other industries that are doing this really well, like how do you look at organizations that are doing gamification really well? Like, God, look at Swift. Like back in the 80s and 90s, how many exercise bikes did you see sitting with dust in living rooms compared to the level of engagement, the amount of hours that people throw into sitting stationary, cycling on a bike in front of a screen? And the way that they do that is obviously building up your status within the platform. And there's a whole host. Julian, you're a Swift rider.
I was going to say we're very fortunate that we've got our head of product that's a very keen cyclist and has been ensconced in Swift world, and I only guess I dabble with that a little bit. But you're right, there's the status aspect, but there's also reward elements to that as well. And those rewards are typically virtual rewards that enable one to upgrade or update their cycle around that, which has some bearing or impact on the quality around that. So starting to, and in fact, what we should do is out of this actually share his blog post around this exact topic. And because he's been thinking a lot about some of the lessons that or insights that have come out of that domain, and is trying to apply them into a resilience world as well, which is pretty cool.
Spot on. And I think that's the question for everyone is, what rewards programs do you respond to personally? I know Qantas has me for life. I mean, I'm always going to fly Qantas because I get status points and I get the ability to get upgrades. And so I'm stuck with a particular airline because of their frequent flyer miles. And I think, to your point before around the points balance piece, there's certainly something in that, but there's a variety of different reward systems out there. I think, have a think about the stuff that hits you really well and captures you, because if it captures you, like, that's human behavior. Spot on. Credit cards.
For me, it's a interactive dog collar that gives me metrics on rating my dog's abilities to other dogs that use this particular collar, from a global standpoint to the breed standpoint to a regional standpoint, and seeing those interactive metrics and how I can influence them gives me motivation. It can change my personal culture, my personal outlook on, oh, I want to beat these other people.
Yeah, so
It's the
a social
gamification of
benchmarking.
exercising my dog.
Yeah, spot on. So you get a social benchmarking system of where you sit against your peers with that particular breed. Like that's fantastic. I'm a big user of Strava. I run a lot. I love running, and I get to see where I am. I get to see if I've done a personal record, so I get to see my own development against myself. And I also have friends on there who will give me a like if I've gone and worked hard that morning. That's all good stuff.
Fitness bands have done the same thing. They've gamified being healthy, exercising, being in motion by measuring your steps, how long you've been idle for, whether you need to stand or drink more water or whatever it may be. They've gamified exercise, so it's not so punitive. It's more of a supportive type thing where you're then motivated.
I was just going to add to Marcus with some. Sorry, I'll just grab this mic so people can hear me. With some of the microsimulations examples that we've done, I think there's another aspect to this as well, which is where we've assessed people's competency in terms of getting them to perform a task. We've given them some validation off the back of that, the pat on the back, the well done. But as part of the, if you like, closeout of that microsimulation, we've asked them to do some personal assessment and reflection on that as well, so that they can come back and say, right, that felt challenging for me, managed to do it reasonably well perhaps, but what's my confidence level around this event type for future? So where did I start out before doing this microsimulation? Where have I got to now as a result of that? And that's really quite an interesting insight to get as well, across a broad base, that's for sure.
I agree. It's like leveraging agile methodologies where we get this feedback, take feedback, build upon it, get more feedback, build upon it, instead of waiting for timed events to happen before we make the next decision. It allows us to pivot on a moment's notice.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Mary Kay, you made a great point there around bringing different generations together. I mean, that's the thing. We've got to consider we have, something as 75% of the workforce is going to be digital native by 2025. Like, these are people who live and grew up living in the phone. Hey, I'm borderline digital native, I'm borderline digital immigrant, but hey, we're all sitting here talking about the different platforms we use. We're kind of in there anyway. So how do we bring people together, including the new generation of resilience? Well, resilience practitioners, number one, great. Non-resilience practitioners is what we're really talking about, right? Engaging our organizations, the stakeholders at all levels.
Right, and to go to Mary Kay's about bringing generations together, I work in K-12 education. So I go anywhere from preschool on up to somebody's getting ready to retire. So there's large gaps to try to tie together, and getting that buy-in within the multiple generations, whether it be gamifying or make it supportive instead of punitive, Kanban or agile type styles for feedback and transparency will allow that same passion potentially for that kindergartner to run around and get that feedback compared to the 70-year-old to also run around and get feedback as well. And they'll have maybe whatever motivation works for them to trigger, to move, to do better, to give more feedback into the process.
Okay, we've got Candace has got a point here. So our rewards are really important. We have a badge system where completion of a certain assurance activities get BC champions. Badges, bronze, silver, and gold, fantastic. And many awardees in the committee meetings was competitive in nature. That's fantastic. There you go. That's a brilliant example, Candace. We'd love to connect after this and talk to you more about that.
And go ahead. The idea of badges as well as Amazon does similar with their employees, where they get a coveted yellow bordered badge when they've been there for so long or hit a certain accomplishment, and it's within the organization. They have a culture where that's a really high achievement or pillar to reach. We do it with our children as we give them rewards, gold stars or grades or however we assess them.
Yeah, and that's part of the journey that we're looking at the moment with microsimulations. We're very much starting with the team-based activity, like how far are we making progress, but we're certainly looking at what does that mastery look like within an organization for resilience as a discipline, because resilience is, to your point earlier, it's a very important part. It is, and it's ever changing. How do we build up the mastery skills of what those people need to be thinking about in terms of their roles and responsibilities to support the organization, be resilient, be risk aware as well. So building up a mastery system to help them achieve personal goals and then what that looks like at a team level as well to build in that social inclusion piece. So I love the badge system, Candace. I think that's fantastic. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Another,
So we've talked about like all the warm fuzzy feelings, right? The adaptations of a lot of organizations to do this. Talk to us a little bit about the ones that are very hesitant. They don't have that belief that they have that belief that it's not going to happen to them, that they're fine, that's maybe coming from that CEO, that CFO that controls the decision in the end. Say the resilience team is pushing for it, but IT is not buying it. You can't get the C-level buy-in. How does that conversation go? Talk to us about a little bit about that process and what that looks like, because there's a lot of organizations out there that don't believe that these situations can happen to them, right? And so those issues, because it's a huge thing. That's why there are so many ransomware attacks. That's why there's so many issues.
Yeah, and I think that's a fantastic question. And we've been challenged with this with some clients, particularly where you might lose a champion driver within the organization who is essentially pushing resilience across the organization. And what we've seen, if that person exits the organization and moves on, number one, you keep in contact with them because you know that they're going to be doing the same thing somewhere else. If the leadership team, however, hasn't bought into resilience at that point in time when that person leaves, there's a lot of work to be done. And so you've got to unpack that a second and go, okay, well, why is that? Why do they not believe in the criticality and the ROI on resilience? And that comes down to what activities that they've been involved in and have they actually seen a return on those activities. Now, if those activities have been a relatively bland approach to engagement and they're sitting down at that, disengaged and passively engaged, you've got a lot of work to do, right? Now, if they're sitting up at that, highly enthused, into it, have had lived experiences, plus they've been through the simulations, they've really had those aha moments, then you're kind of good. You're all right. It's going to bridge over until that next champion comes in. And if anything, they're probably going to expedite the hiring of that next champion. And that's the difference between the level of engagement. That's why when we walk into an organization and understand, right, well, what have we done here before we got here? And do we have, from a resilience perspective, do we have brand damage we need to repair? Because if the activities have been not a lot more than something like an e-learning package or something quite bland and quite stale that hasn't changed in a long time, you will see executives go, I don't know why I'm here, to be perfectly honest. And if they're disengaged, then that's a world of pain, and you've got a lot of work to do to get that back.
I think you touched on a really important point there about giving them the aha moment, right? And I think that that's really where certainly I think there's some real value around these small scale micro simulations, right? And it's not about saying let's run 6 of these across a massive cohort across the business. It's let's target a team of a half a dozen stakeholders in the business and have them walk away going, gee, that didn't feel that comfortable necessarily, or yeah, we've really got a problem here that we need to think about. And hopefully that provides that light bulb or that aha moment to go, right, all right, we need to go away and speak with someone. We need to think more about this. We need to invest more in the program. And I think that's where we've seen the micro simulations piece in particular add a lot of value into that domain.
Mary Kay, you've raised a really good question there. For C-suite, my experience is follow the money. How much does business insurance for hacking cost versus resilience and your insurance discount premiums for an established program?
Well, this is touching on some of your history.
I'm very close to this conversation. So I spent probably the first 8 years of my career at Aon in the global risk consulting team. So we're a risk consulting arm within a major insurance broker, attaching risk consulting services to build up the level of resilience and risk preparedness, essentially, so the brokers within that organization could get a more competitive, essentially, price on insurance. What I will say is...
You're amongst friends here.
Yeah, this is being recorded.
Virtual code of silence.
It's a safe space. It's just us and the entire...
That's right. The entire universe. It's the insurance industry is coming a long way and pretty quickly on this. So the insurance industry has hardened really quickly. So that means obviously premiums have gone up because the industry has been, how do I put it, discounting premiums for too long in comparison to the cost claims. So it's essentially almost an unsustainable industry there for a long time. Now that came because a lot of pension funds threw a lot of money into insurance companies and risk, to essentially underwrite risk because there was no other way to get good returns, to be perfectly honest. And so they went to that industry. Now that saturated the market, and from a capital perspective, which meant that they could unsustainably write more and lower premiums, that's changed. And organizations trying to get things like cyber coverage right now, that is a drying up industry. So that is a really difficult place. Now we're in discussions with a number of major insurers at a multinational level. They will never, ever open the black box of this is how we underwrite specifically what discount you will or won't get, right? Like that's there's so many market forces and variables involved in that. Risk is only part of that. It's only a small part of that. There's also supply and demand dynamics there. But what I will say from our discussions with the insurance industry, we are working very closely with a number of the big players there. They are seeing resilience as the next forefront of risk management. So they like, this is it's actually quite a time to be in resilience actually from that perspective. To your point before, it is something that typically gets the CFO's attention. So what does this mean? You'll never be able to go back and say, well, it's going from X to Y, because anyone that does tell you that, I think is maybe elaborating the truth, to be perfectly honest, because I just know how underwriters work. But what I will say is that organizations that turn up to try and sell their risk to an insurance company and get a decent premium are going to be absolutely up against it if they can't show an active or a proactive approach to building resilience into their organization against business disruption and cyber. If you do not have an active resilience program, there's a really good chance you won't be able to get coverage. That's where it's going. And so the insurance industry are looking at resilience and trying to get a better understanding of what does good look like. And they've gone a long way. Back in the day, they would have risk engineers that would go out on site and would go, okay, show us your BCP. And since COVID, they've realized that having a BCP without anything surrounding it is not a really valuable piece of work. But if you actually have an active program that they can see resilience working on a daily basis, that's what they're looking for now. So the insurers' lens has matured a lot over the last 5 years in terms of what good looks like for resilience, which is great for us as an industry, but it's also up to us to shape that moving forward as well. Candice, you've also made a point there. So changing perspective on BC as the next advisor or staff member is really hard. I think you always need to start with an easy win exercise. I totally agree, as evidence as to why BC process works in politically motivated organisations that are used to pressure they don't tend here in the UK. Oh, wow. And so thanks, Candice, for dialing in. To respond to identifying issues and pointing out areas of concern, because maintaining a high risk appetite for too long. I 100% agree with you. We made the point around having aha moments, and we made the point before of, when we walk into an organization, getting an understanding of the lay of the land is really important, because sometimes you're dealing with brand damage from a resilience perspective, right? If prior to that, the executive team or leadership team or any stakeholder in any team really hasn't seen an ROI in terms of why am I here? And it doesn't have to be monetary. It's like literally, why am I here? And if they can't, if they haven't had an aha moment as to, oh, that's why I'm here, yeah, you've got to find that quick win. You almost, and our microsimulations, we curate them to make sure there are a few trip hazards in there so that people go, yeah, I don't know how to do that. And I've got the context of this threat. So I've got acute stress. Yeah, I need to learn how to do that really quick. And at the end of every microsimulation, like I've seen it firsthand, everyone's sitting around going, probably need to do more of that. And boom, if you hear that, it's like you've had your aha moment, right? People are in there. But Candice, I 100% agree. If you walk in and it's a program that has been flapping in the wind for quite some time, and there's not a lot of aha that's been had, yeah, you've got to find that quick win really quickly. And I think politely, diplomatically, politically, in a politically correct way internally, few trip hazards really help, to be perfectly honest, because people have that moment of, this doesn't all work as I thought.
Yeah, but I was going to say, in a slightly different context, Marcus, about sort of quick wins. It doesn't necessarily have to be trip hazards per se. So if I think about insurance organisation that we work with back in Aussie, I mean, they started out with actually audit gaps and said, we've got, we're opening the kimono a little bit to you around some audit challenges that we've surfaced that we want to close out on. We want to leverage the microsimulations capability to do that. So I guess in a sense it's an aha moment, but it's one that had already been previously identified, but that was actually turned out to be, I guess, not only the quick win that we had with the capability deployment there.
Yeah, spot on. You're absolutely right. I mean, if you can find a compliance quick win as well, that's always helpful. Helps the team move in a direction. I never like to use compliance at the only quick win. Right?
It's not necessarily
one of those hygiene factors. I think it's like, because it's very rarely the aha moment that generates the next investment into doing things.
But what I think it did do though was it created this buy-in around the capability set, and it was right. So we've used this capability to achieve this outcome from a compliance perspective. Now, there's a whole bunch, to the point around here, like there's a whole bunch of other things that we want to touch on around it, and that's the way the programs continue to build out across their business.
Yeah, spot on. Okay, well, we're coming up on time, guys. I just want to say a quick thank you to everyone who's joined online. I know, thank you for bearing with us with you're right, a relatively echoey room, and I do apologise for any muffledness. We're going to make this recording available to the universe. That's me watching my comments on the insurance industry. So you'll be able to relive all your favourite moments. Hopefully the audio's come through better in the recording. So apologies for that, guys. But in saying that, listen, we're here to collaborate with industry. We are practitioners at heart. As I mentioned before, for us, technology is really around enabling people to connect with people and shape behavior. Like that's just how we view it. So really appreciate your engagement in this session. Great questions, great comments, great collaboration, guys. So thanks very much. And anyone in Denver, we are obviously, well, we're here for the next couple of days, but we are also looking to be back as we're building out our team here as well. So look forward to connecting in person next time, hopefully in due course. But thanks everyone. We'll see you again soon. Cheers.